Good morning, and welcome once again to the Eclectic Radical. I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, and returning today is Seth Sturm, the co-chair of the West Virginia Democratic Party Indigenous Caucus, and one of the very few good people left trying to make the Democrats keep any promises. How's it going, Seth?
It's going okay. We're making some progress. We've got the attention of top DNC officials. We are making real progress in that front. Whether or not they take action like they did in Alabama remains to be seen. But
well, you know how it is with top DNC officials.
It's not great from my experience so far, but yeah. I'm with you.
But I mean, attention is good. You want attention for anything that involves the sort of shenanigans that have been going on, I guess is the best way to put it. So I certainly understand why attention is an improvement. What's been going on there? Let's talk about attention from the DNC.
Okay, so the last time I was on, I don't remember what exactly was going on. I think we had just attempted to reform the caucus.
The last time you were on, you had reformed the caucus, and the Democratic Party was saying that, no, you can't reform the caucus, basically.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. As a matter of fact, I'm not supposed to call myself the chair of the Indigenous Caucus. For one, there is no Indigenous Caucus anymore. The Democrats have made that abundantly clear. So what happened was after we attempted to reform the caucus, the party came out with an affirmative action plan, voted on several weeks after we had reformed, stating that they had an intention of reforming an Indigenous caucus at some point in the future. When isn't exactly clear, at whatever time they deem necessary, I take it. So I filed a grievance that they heard in July of this year. And before the grievance, it was a whole, I didn't even really understand what my grievance was, other than to make them recognize the Indigenous Caucus's work and to bring it back. I only filed the grievance because the party refused to have any discussions about it and said, well, if you don't like it, file a grievance. And so that's what I did. We got a little bit of attention from it, and that's how the DNC Natives chair, Clara Pratt, I got her attention on Twitter from this whole grievance process, and we started communicating that way. So it was a whole mess with the entire grievance. They filed I think it was a 20-page motion to dismiss my grievance that was just full of lies, demonstrable lies about me, my intentions within the party, what I'm doing. No real reference to the substance of the grievance that I was filing or what we were talking about. It was just basically Seth Sturm's bad. Don't listen to him. But they did hear the grievance.
Seth Sturm is mean to white people who don't keep their promises to folks that form affirmative action plans with them.
Exactly. They want people. This is the root of the entire problem once you get down to it. So just rush through that part of the story. They heard the grievance. They didn't take any action. Within a week of that, the DNC vice chair, through Chair Clara Pratt, the DNC Natives chair, offered mediation for the Indigenous Caucus and the state party. And I said, if their intention is to bring back an Indigenous caucus, I don't know what we're meeting other than to assuage our anger, let's say, to be honest. And I said, if you want to have mediation with the DNC and the party, I want it to involve leaders from the Black Caucus and leaders from the transgender community, because they've been targeted just as much as I have, or the Indigenous Caucus has. And after that, they just kind of pulled back, because the mediation was never about bringing about change. It was just to calm us down and make us feel like we're being heard.
So, morning, Gira.
Good morning. So that's what my takeaway from it was. They completely walked back the mediation offer. And so now we're at the point where this week, we will be sending in an official challenge, a formal challenge to the Rules and Bylaws Committee of the DNC, signed on by at least 15 Black and Indigenous or trans people. It's open to all Democrats, but we're looking for that many, at least from those impacted communities, because what we've kind of come to discover is that we took personally for so long, what I took personally for so long, has turned into a systemic issue where they're silencing diverse voices from every angle. I mean, even the executive committee that's made up of mostly white people, mostly senior citizens, is being targeted with these exclusionary practices and weaponized procedural rules that are just meant to advance personal agendas and get people onto the committee that they want. I mean, it's been crazy. There's actually a grievance being filed by people that aren't me about the actions being taken by the party chair and by the chair of the Rules and Bylaws Committee, Selena Vickers. No. So there's all of this going on. And again, this is just West Virginia, but there's this larger, this is a microcosm of what's happening across the country.
This is that process whereby you see in the news, progressives take over state party. And then when you actually look at what's going on, there's nothing actually progressive happening. It's a power readjustment between the wealthy white folks in charge, and it's designed to make it look like they're doing something about the people everyone in the state is mad at, and really it's just a retrenchment.
And they use the language of oppression and appropriate the identities of impacted, marginalized people to do it. They say we're fighting for Black and Indigenous people, we're fighting for trans rights, we're fighting for this. But then when push comes to shove, if anybody from those groups tries to speak up and become higher up in the party, they work very hard to silence them and to keep power for their small group of people. You can see it happening. And again, this is not just West Virginia. What I'm saying is exposing this larger trend. There is, at least in Alabama, there is actively, the DNC has taken action in Alabama. They have until February of 2024 to completely change their bylaws, because they said that the changes that they've made have hurt the diversity advancements that they made in 2019. These are the same issues. These are the same people that West Virginia modeled all of our affirmative action plans, the structure of our committees, everything off of the Alabama plan by design. Harold Ickes is a DNC insider millionaire from Virginia who's actively involved in both states. And both states are having these problems. The difference is in Alabama, Black party leaders were accused of discrimination for targeting the LGBTQ caucus and the youth caucus, saying that they were majority white and didn't need caucus. I'm not agreeing with that decision, but it was more power politics at play than anything else. They said what they said, but let's face it, it's because they felt that their caucuses were being diminished by outside influences, and they don't know how to. Connecting these dots makes you sound crazy, right? And they might not even know what's happening in West Virginia. But from my perspective, looking what's happened here and the players involved, the actors involved, and taking a step back and looking at Alabama, I'm seeing the same people. You're seeing the same exact tactics being used.
Well, it's the same retrenching of power. The people who control the people who control parties in individual states look like the ruling class of the people who vote Democrat in that state. But it's important to understand that caucus power is supposed to be, in theory, about including everybody in the democratic process. And if you're saying, using the language of liberation, that we don't need an LGBTQ caucus because LGBTQ people are white, what is that saying? Is that saying that that there should be a white people's caucus? That's weird. Doesn't sound good. Are they saying that there is a white people's caucus that we're unaware of?
Their argument is that, again, the DNC has taken action to make sure that these caucuses get reformed, which is the right action. Let me be clear. That's the right action, because in Alabama, LGBTQ people and probably the youth, if you look at the makeup of the Democratic Executive Committee, probably are underrepresented. My point is that what they're saying, if you listen, is that the racial minorities aren't having enough of a voice, which I think is a reaction. I think that what they're seeing is the same type of manipulation we're seeing in West Virginia, where these things have been weaponized. Mm-hmm. And rather than they came at it in the way that makes it seem that was wrong. You can't shut these caucuses down, or they're the ones who are underrepresented. You know, in West Virginia, we have a women's caucus and a senior caucus. Both of those groups have full representation on the executive committee. I mean, there's an argument to be made that they're over-influenced. LGBTQ people and youth people in Alabama are not over-influencing anybody. They need a voice. They need to actively be heard. But again, this comes down to power politics. And I think that if you take a look at the bigger picture and what's happening there, you see a more holistic view of the tactics being taken by both Black Party leaders in response to the outside influence of somebody like Harold Ickes. Now, if these caucuses can be made to act in a way that is definitely in line with their stated purposes rather than weaponizing. And I know here we have these caucuses that will all get together and pass these, like they passed a bunch of resolutions about me once to smear me because all of the chairs were in with this person who's working with Harold Ickes. So there is internal conflict at play here. And again, you can't take that out to the broader scope. You can't say that you can't take away their voice just because you think that your voice isn't being heard. Again, these things have to be addressed in a real way so that these internal divisions don't dominate what we're talking about and don't overshadow the issues of social justice. Any system, any organization that you're in has to be held accountable for their diversity.
I mean, you have to have.
So I'm not saying the Democrats are great, but I mean, I'm here and I have to fight back against.
If you're not being just to your membership, then how can you pursue social justice in the wider world?
Exactly. And also you look at what third parties, let's say, let's not even take the Republicans. Let's look at third party people who see that the Democrats do this performative action all the time where they say, we're the ones who are for social justice. We are the ones who have your back. But then when push comes to shove, you're witnessing that that's not true. We're seeing them in action, targeting people of color, transgender people in a real way where it's very specific to the person who's rising up. There was a woman in Huntington. She's transgender and she was targeted basically for her gender identity and forced out of her committee. She filed an affidavit with the county clerk, with somebody in her county about what happened, where she had it notarized and filed in the county to say that the chair of the West Virginia Democratic Party targeted her for her gender identity.
Wow. That's right. Not cool.
And nobody's talking about this. Anytime that you see a news story, I see Connor says the default thing is a white caucus.
But so it's true. Well, so you do have to nuance it a little. A white, straight, wealthy caucus.
Right. I mean,
because one of the things that I've said a long time is one of the biggest problems with identity politics is people who look like me have been running my country, or allegedly my country, for a very long time. And yet people actually in my situation like me aren't doing any better off because it's all about wealth and power. And yes, they're white supremacists, but the biggest reason they're white supremacists is because they already have the wealth and power, and most of them are white. And they don't like anything that
aligns for life. I don't want to be reduction. I don't do class reductionist stuff. There's definitely intersectionality, but that intersectionality occurs at these lower class levels. I mean, if you're up at the higher levels, it's not really impacting you in the same way. So you've got to. I mean, it's like when you look at somebody like a billionaire like Jay-Z. It's not empowering to see that, to me, because that's not an attainable goal. That's not something you can praise.
You can watch.
Wealth is a problem.
You can see the system in the same way, and you can see both the problems and the solutions playing out in weird ways in front of us that clearly don't work. Where you've got Comcast. It was Comcast? Yes, it was Comcast. Comcast was discriminating against media billionaire Byron Allen because he's black and his and his comedy station is black owned. But if you actually look at Byron Allen's content on his station's content on Sling or the internet or somewhere else where you can see it, just, not Comcast, they're not discriminating against black content in this case. They're discriminating against fairly typical television content, comedy content of the, Hollywood Squares variety, for a simple example. And they're discriminating against it just because the billionaire is black. So on the one hand, there is a racial issue. But on the other hand, the black capitalist is not producing revolutionary content that advances the cause of black people as a whole. He's making money off typical comedy content.
Right.
And so the racism is real, but the solution to the racism isn't Byron Allen.
No, I mean, people need to understand that the racism is it's real. All of the bigotry is real. This is the point. Whenever they're talking about us, this is great. We love indigenous people. We love trans people. We love black people.
Yep.
But when the push comes to shove and somebody is starting to rise up in the ranks that isn't controlled by them, they unleash attacks that look a lot like what a racist attack would look like. So again, it's both things. But I don't want to compare the struggles of a billionaire to that of somebody working class. A black trans individual who's living in poverty is definitely not experienced. It's a different level. Right.
And we don't hear about their experience. We get the trials and tribulations of middle class of well-off middle class white queer people thrown at us. Pete Buttigieg becomes our symbol of a better way for the future, despite the fact that he's not really any different. Which reminds me, has Pete Buttigieg spoken out on what's happening in Gaza yet and called for an end to the violence?
I've not seen it. If it's happened, I've not seen any real Democratic leaders.
Comes to my mind because his father is Maltese and was something of a liberation professor and friends with. I'm not, obviously, as we've seen, being friends with Cornel West isn't the be all and end all. But I mean, he's someone who was politically aligned with Cornel West. And yet Pete Buttigieg has become another symbol of the establishment. And that's, they want to do that to everyone, Barack Obama and Pete Buttigieg replacing the people who are actually experiencing the oppression that other people talk about.
That's exactly what's, you get these people that fill these certain roles and positions. I mean, they're checking boxes constantly. I mean, basically what we have in terms of these diversity caucuses is they want to just check boxes. They want to make sure that we have representation equal to the population. So, like indigenous people, we're 0.3% of the population in West Virginia. So we need to be proportionately 1% of the executive committee. And that's being debated by the party leaders, is whether or not they should even have that. And then the person that they are counting as indigenous, I don't necessarily know that they meet the definition of indigenous.
Tribal citizenship.
Well, tribal citizenship, or there's a person here in West Virginia who claimed to be indigenous, claimed to have ancestry, was running for the House. And when they lost their House seat, they posted their ancestry results that showed they weren't indigenous whatsoever. Now they're sitting on the executive committee. He's the same guy who ran a racist campaign on Twitter against his opponent. it's crazy that they have these rules that would say he cannot be on the executive committee because he engaged in these behaviors, but they don't enforce those rules whatsoever. But
yeah, that's
but
definitely
you get somebody
weird.
in there that doesn't look like them or doesn't adhere to their agenda, and they throw the rule book at them with interpretations that are out there. I talked about the way that they're suppressing even their own committee. The last executive committee meeting that they had, there were individuals there allowed to hold up to 4 proxy votes, which directly contravenes both the West Virginia Democratic Party bylaws and Robert's Rules of Order that they always fall back on to silence everybody, and they just do what they want. And
that's the nice thing. That's the nice thing about Robert's Rules of Order, though. As long as you adhere to a certain set of procedural guidelines and are polite, you can completely dominate a procedure by strategic rules lawyering and ignoring the rules when you're in control. So you rules lawyer, and sadly, this is something that people are learning from Republicans. If you watch the way they've been operating in the federal government for years, you rules lawyer whenever you're not in power and somebody else could do something, and then you ignore all the rules when you have the power.
You just described what's happening in West Virginia to it. There's actually a series by the chair of the new Rules and Bylaws Committee here on the WVDP, West Virginia Democratic Party, a video series that is how to use their rules against them, basically. I'm paraphrasing. That's not the title of the series. And how to take over a state party. And this is the group that was hosting these events or video series with her was People for Democratic Party Reform. And there's just this network of people who are funded by these white wealthy individuals coming into places and trying to manipulate the rules in order to, I don't know, take over these state parties to get, in red states, there's a lot of division. People get these ideas of how they're going to take over the party, and that goes against the DNC. So the DNC, I think, wants to rein them in a little bit.
You had this whole idea, and it's interesting what the consequences have been in a post-Bernie world. But you had this whole idea during the Bernie Sanders campaigns in 2016 and 2020 that progressive independents were going to take over the Democratic Party and make it better. And you see the way that game plan was put into effect, and you see that it doesn't actually change much, number one. But number two, you see that what's the best way to try to put it? That all these ideas for taking over the Democratic Party are already being practiced on a massive scale by the people who already run the Democratic Party.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
And if the people who already run the Democratic Party are using these tactics that are intended to quote unquote take it over, well, they have institutional power, so they have an advantage using those tactics.
Right. Now, I mean, to put this into perspective, you're exactly right, because what happened at this committee meeting that I wasn't witness to, but that I did see video of after the fact, was there seemed to be a group of people who had pre-planned to have these proxies given to individuals. And the party, for the first time since COVID pandemic had started, did not allow virtual participation, despite weeks of protesting from committee members asking for virtual participation. One person even said, I'm not getting COVID just to come to this meeting. And they did not allow virtual participation. And then there's this group of people that were allowed to hold multiple proxies when nobody else had any awareness that this was going to be a thing. And the chair actually said, in the interest of inclusivity, we're going to allow them to hold their proxies. This is a gross violation. And they had elections for committee member seats, which is probably why they
let me ask a question here. This sounds a situation where the holders of proxies would not have any way of knowing how the people whose proxies they're voting would want them to actually vote, because the people whose proxies they're holding didn't know about what was happening.
Well, so apparently these people did know. All of them had written lists, And what's important to remember, too, is that before this meeting, Selena Vickers, the Rules and Bylaws Committee chair who ruled that this should be allowed and it's okay to do it this way at the meeting, spoke up about it. She had a meeting before this meeting, a luncheon for members of the Democratic Executive Committee. I don't know what happened at these places. I don't know what kind of backroom talks are happening or how they're organizing this. But I do know that there was just one group. It wasn't like there's these, you could tell there are factions within the party, and it wasn't like everybody knew they were going to do this proxy thing, because the past they ruled one proxy per person. You can't have multiple proxies because that's the rule.
Yeah.
This one instance, there were multiple people holding multiple proxies who were all voting for the people that they were pushing for these officer positions within the party. So we're seeing rules manipulation at a bigger level than what I had even brought forward, saying that, it's racial, it's all of this. They resorted to racist tactics against people like me and Mary Ann Claytor. But the overall goal is just taking over a Democratic state party for whatever reason. And people, to put a little perspective on this, the West Virginia Democratic Party is the most toothless in the country, probably. We went from having a majority in both state houses in 2014 and having every congressional office. So governor, state auditor, attorney general, all of those offices were Democrats. And in 10 years' time, we have, I think it's 9 senators out of 34. No, it's 2 senators out of 34 and 9 House members out of 100 or whatever. It's crazy.
Doesn't the decline of the West Virginia Democratic Party have a remarkable overlap with the success of the career of Joe Manchin, allegedly the only Democrat who can get elected in West Virginia?
Listen, this is one of the main reasons why Mary Ann Claytor got kicked off of the West Virginia Federation of Democratic Women in 2018 for speaking out against Joe Manchin in 2018. This has been a problem. They spent over $100,000 on mailers in his 2018 election, praising him for voting with Trump X percent of time.
And they wonder why they can't get elected.
Then they wonder, because they're running away from what they claim are their fundamental values, their principles. And they don't have any, they're shameless in that pursuit of power. They say one thing publicly and then never back it up, and nobody holds them accountable.
I want people to understand, though, the way that the Joe Manchin politics, the Joe Manchin political positions, the Joe Manchin leadership style has destroyed the Democratic brand in West Virginia with the people who were voting Democrat before Joe Manchin. Think about this. When people tell you talking about national elections, that Joe Manchin is the only person who could win a Senate seat running as a Democrat in West Virginia. Remember that everyone was a Democrat in West Virginia before Joe Manchin, and that Joe Manchin is the Democrat people in West Virginia have been rejecting.
Joe Manchin has done more harm to the state, to the Democratic Party, than is imaginable to people. The policies that he supports, I mean, he's partly responsible for this new hydrogen hub that's coming in that's supposed to be great. The Democrats love this hydrogen hub, but it's really an offshoot of the hydraulic fracturing, and it's not a real green alternative. And they're touting all of these jobs. We don't even know how many of these jobs will be local or how long term they are, as far as I can tell. And this is what they do. The people, when it comes time for it, the Democrats are always pushing in West Virginia these bad policies. And I can't help but notice, just to put this back out there, Alabama and West Virginia both are coal mining states to a certain degree. Alabama less so, I think, than West Virginia.
The Warrior
reliance on the industry.
The Warrior Met coal strike is at a coal mine in Alabama, though, remember?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I'm saying that it's just an industry that's in that state. And I can't help but notice that they're trying to take over these Democratic parties in places where the people of a state are subjected to these extraction companies and their policies that impoverish, endanger, make us sick, that kill us. these are really bad things for us. But I can't help but notice that the Democrats in both places seem to be comfortable with that industry, and that's where the focus, that they don't want grassroots to come up and take over a Democratic Party in one of these states that could then become adversarial to their industry, is what I can't help but notice.
Well,
and,
I mean,
maybe that's conspiratorial.
Well, it's
maybe
not,
it's not.
How conspiratorial is it when, I mean, I'm just going to go with the public stuff that we know about and have talked about on previous shows. Joe Manchin, coal baron. Jim Justice, coal baron. Joe Manchin convinces Jim Justice to become a Democrat and run for governor, which Jim Justice does and wins. Republican president kills an investigation. A study into particular extraction processes that Jim Justice pioneers and uses heavily and relies upon. And Jim Justice is a Republican again.
I can bring this back out a little bit more too. A lot of the mining that happens in Alabama is strip mining.
Yes.
Which is what that, in West Virginia, I don't know if it's different. It can't be that
different. In West Virginia, it's blowing up mountaintops. That's Jim Justice's line.
Right. But here's what I was getting ready to say. In the 1940s, Franklin Roosevelt appointed Harold Ickes Sr. As the coal boss for the nation's coal mines. So he was responsible for going up against strikes and trying to keep coal production up during these times. And I can't help but notice this connection here between these coal mine producing states and the involvement of Harold Ickes.
Well, the official version of the FDR story is that Harold Ickes Sr. was pro-union and was on the side of the miners and not the coal mines. The actual fact is obviously Roosevelt was trying to, as much as possible, do what was necessary to satisfy the demands of workers while still keeping bosses happy and ultimately bosses.
Exactly. That's from what my research into it has shown. Because that was one of the, I read an article just this weekend about the senior Harold Ickes bragging about that they were going to keep the mining the coal flowing, basically. They were going to find a way to keep the coal flowing during these times in the 1940s. So again, I do think that it's that posture. Look, we're going back and seeing that same posturing of, I'm here for this group, X group of people, and then turning your back on them when the policy time comes. So it's mirroring, it's history repeating itself. And again, I'm here raising the alarm. Hopefully this challenge raises the alarm to the point where people take notice. You and Connor are the only people who have even tried to get this story out there with me. And that's majorly appreciated. There have been national people who have talked to me, at least temporarily, that know part of the story and ignore it. There are local people who are reporters who are very adversarial to me and do not want to talk to me about any of this and mock me on Twitter, all of that. The story is going to come out and they're going to see that this is as big as I told them it was. And that's what gets me, because this is a national story. This is about the corruption. I mean, take your third parties that look at the Democrats and see what's wrong with us. This is an opportunity for the Democrats to either show them that that they will take action to defend equity within their party ranks, or it's an opportunity for third parties to say, look at this pivotal moment when there are multiple states experiencing the same type of division, race. And here's the thing. Think about this. This guy's coming in and basically inciting racial tensions.
Yes.
He's manipulating races against each other and causing this tension within these parties. It's really bad. It's not a good thing. So this is a moment for the Democrats to stand up and put their foot down and say, we actually won't stand for that, and prove everybody wrong. Because right now the prevailing opinion is no action will be taken unless it benefits the party as a whole. It doesn't benefit them to have grassroots people come up in the state of West Virginia. It's too risky. There are billions and trillions of dollars underneath my feet right now in this state that is being extracted and the wealth being sent right out of this state to other people. That's what they want to keep.
Since you mentioned Harold Ickes Sr. and FDR, that was the same era. During that era, the great-grandfather of the current king of Jordan controlled most of the Arabian Peninsula. And at that time, the oil was in a small part of the peninsula controlled by a noble family nobody had ever heard of, called the House of Saud. But they made a deal with FDR about oil. And he said, hey, you get to stay in power as long as I get enough oil for my military machine. And, you know, as after World War II, they were the rulers of the whole Arabian Peninsula and a major player on the world scene. And the King of Jordan just has Jordan. It's interesting how things change.
Yeah, I mean, it's really strange. The deeper, I mean, because you got to put yourself in my shoes here. I just came on because Mary Ann Claytor said they're going to do an indigenous caucus, and I don't think they have any indigenous people to do it. And I said, well, all right, I didn't have any interest in being involved in this party in that way. And then the slow realization that the first time I even heard about Harold was months into my tenure as chair. And it was in an email where somebody said, Harold said this. And I'm like, who's Harold? Who's Harold? And then it took months to even realize that this person was a DNC person or an outsider, Bill de Blasio's mentor. Like, it took forever for me to uncover this because I wasn't thinking that this is some big convoluted scheme from outside influences. But, you know, that's what's happened. That's what's evolved over time, is my understanding of what exactly we're going through. And, you know, it's just this broad over. Well, this is basically, you don't get grassroots action like this. And everything that's been portrayed as grassroots in West Virginia has been funded by a DNC millionaire from Virginia. It's not real. All of the reporting about when Mike Pushkin took over as the party and Danielle Walker, they pushed Danielle Walker out relatively quickly. She took a position with the ACLU in West Virginia, executive director. They fired her in 6 months.
Wow.
I don't know what happened. But it just seems that things are so messed up in West Virginia, and they can just openly engage in behavior that is unethical, illegal, and it contravenes all of their rules with impunity. They can do it without any worry that anybody's going to hold them accountable. And there's only a handful of people here willing to call them out. That's the other thing people have to remember. If it wasn't for people like Mary Ann Claytor, for me, for there's this fellow who's filing this grievance against them now, Jacob Hively, I think his name is. He's a real Democrat, loves the Democratic Party. Probably, would disagree with everything I'm saying here. So I'm just name dropping him because he's supposed to file this grievance, because we're talking about average rank and file people that most people would just say they're liberals, all of these things.
Yeah.
From the third party perspective, I don't agree with that necessarily, but these are the people that are now realizing there's a systemic problem from the leadership within the party, and something has to be done. So there's a cry now. It's not just Seth Sturm, as the one executive committee member said, alone in the wilderness. You know, I'm not screaming into the void anymore. There are people who know what's happening. It's just a matter now of making sure that they follow through and hold the people accountable that need to be held accountable, and restore a little bit of faith in the system that they claim to.
Well, this whole process of suborning the grassroots and engaging in a progressive takeover that's really just the establishment defending itself. This is what people are talking about when they say you don't change the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party changes you.
Well, and I would say this. That's because the people who are presenting themselves as the grassroots progressives, they're fake. They're being funded. They're being backed by other people when they have an agenda. You can see the people who are real and authentic in these spaces. I mean, I keep, not just me that's putting it out there. Mary Ann Claytor is one of the strongest voices in West Virginia. She was the communications director for, that might be wrong. I don't want to misstate it. She worked for the party for a while before Mike Pushkin fired her. She just did the work. She's not somebody who hasn't. Nobody will find anything from Mary Ann where she has any kind of corporate agenda or she does anything that's anti-worker. she's not that person. She really does believe in the things that the Democratic Party claims to believe in. And that's my point. Rank and file people really aren't necessarily our adversaries. If we have good policy from the left perspective, they're the ones who will embrace it. We just have to overcome these influences of money and the power politics at play to get to those people.
But that's the problem, is that the power is held by people with money. So even if someone really doesn't take any corporate donations, I've worked with national candidates trying to get elected to Congress. Anybody trying to get elected to Congress is spending a lot of time making cold calls to millionaires asking them for money. Now, good people who believe in everything we believe in still have to make cold calls to millionaires to ask them for money if they want to be elected to office as a Democrat.
I'll say this.
It's important to understand that.
Again, I would say this. Marianne Clater and I have run 3 statewide campaigns.
Oh, I'm not trying to say everybody's bad. Well, no, but
I'm saying this. We spent less money per vote than any other candidate every time we ran. Well, there are ways we cannot play the game the way that it's played normally. If you engage in cold calling millionaires, you've already lost. You're going to succumb to the influences of the party. You're going to start doing what they tell you is the right thing to do. They tell you, there are literally meetings where you go to and they're okay, now this is how things are actually done.
But here's the
thing. To get you to follow that script. We push back on that every time.
You remember how not too long ago there was a big kerfluffle because Cornel West's campaign took a donation from Harlan Crow?
Oh, yeah.
And the reaction to it was bad. But the reason it happened in the first place is because, the Cornel West campaign was being run by a traditional political person. Peter Dow is a progressive. Peter Dow has good positions on a lot of issues now, but Peter Dow is still someone who learned how to run a campaign in the old way of doing things. And these are the things you have to do to win. And these are and you have to get money from X, Y, and Z. And if you're still doing things that way, then things like the Harlan Crow donation are going to happen.
No, that's what people need to understand. There's a different way to do things, and there's a different way to organize. And I don't think that it's you do have to have some money for sure. But there's a lot of wasted money in campaigns. It's one of the things that people need to understand. They try to get you to go through fundraisers, people that will take a percentage of whatever you take in because they gave you a list or whatever, or helped you do some fundraising scripts. There's this entire economy built around campaigning that you have to go through it around it. You cannot succumb to it. Otherwise, progressives can't win.
In Tennessee in 2020, despite every effort of the state party, a candidate named Marquita Bradshaw was nominated to be the Democratic candidate for Senate in Tennessee. She got zero support from the party and lost badly in the general election. She won the statewide primaries with less money than any of the losing candidates and spent less money than any of the losing candidates. And then suddenly, after winning the Democratic nomination and proving she can get people out, suddenly there's no platform to tell anyone who wasn't participating in the primary what's going on. There's no national support. And I would be willing to bet, I don't have inside knowledge of Tennessee the way I have inside knowledge of West Virginia from people like you and Paula Jean, but I would be willing to bet that the state party in Tennessee sabotaged her the same way the state party sabotaged Paula Jean in both of her runs.
Oh, and Marianne Clater. This is
Yes.
the thing. We are fighting against, you have to fight against the public and their opinion and the right wing perception of you and the Republicans. But then if you're not in from the get go with the state party or the national party, they will work against you because, again, it's that grassroots thing. They do not want to see people who have organized based around ideas and not money rise up with that perception. Any outlier who's able to speak up and convince people that they're right is a danger. You have to take them down at a personal level. That's why the trans woman who's rising up within the party has to be slandered and minimized and really called out on her gender identity because they want to do harm. That's why there's a 20-page motion about me and how horrible I am. And that's why Marianne Clater gets kicked off of the West Virginia Federation of Democratic Women in 2018. Now, I will say she's back on, I think she's back on the board now in some role. They've, come to terms with everything. And that was a heated moment with past leaders. I don't know what it's like now. I don't want to disparage them or cause any conflict for Marianne. She's working with them in a real way. But it doesn't change what happened in the past. And I think that that's important to keep in mind moving forward, because these are obstacles anybody who rises up will face. And we have to address these at the root level. You have to address the cause, which is the manipulation of the rules and the violation of the rules willingly. Well, a lot of the times you have to have some measure, some accountability in place, and then actually hold people accountable when they violate rules.
I would submit that it's to protect the rights of the quote unquote real Democrats. Remember, there is a court case from California. The Bernie Sanders voters sued the state of California and the state of California Democratic Party because delegates who were elected to vote for Bernie Sanders voted for Hillary Clinton at the convention. And the lawsuit was fought by the California State Party, saying people who register Democrat and vote in primaries, we don't have any responsibility to them. We only have a responsibility to the members of the Democratic Party, who they basically defined as themselves. The Democratic Party is a quote unquote private corporation that is only responsible to its owners.
You see this in every aspect. If you get involved in the anything internal with them, you have to rise up the right way. The reason that people didn't support Marianne, who did like her, they kept trying to push her, run for county commission, run for, try to get in at this level first. And then we can work our way up. And they want people to work their way up because it enforces that hierarchy.
I cannot tell you how many people in 2020 I spoke to who said, not publicly, but off the record, who said they said, if you run for city council instead, we guarantee you'll get in. Don't do this, do this. And people were told this.
They tell you that all the time. See, this is the thing. If people
now, I don't know that they actually keep those promises at all.
No, they don't. That's the other thing. Sometimes they will. If you're really good, sometimes that's the olive branch to see if you're able to be. I don't want to say if you're amiable to their suggestions, let's say.
Yes.
That's what they want to see. Yeah, okay, that's better.
Follow the rules of the system.
Right. They want people who will do what they're told when they're told to do it, basically. And you see this happening all the time. Just like you said, people are saying that. That's a common tactic. So people who are wanting to run for something, if they come to you and say that, don't do it. Go harder. If you're serious about making change. People always say, "Oh, go for something smaller because you've got an ego. Nobody wants to run for city council." That's just dissuading people from going for those other offices. I will say,
I do think that more people should run for city council than Congress, but not for the same reasons.
No, I agree. It should be if you want to. If there's somebody there that really is powerful, you could tell some people have what it takes to be that public leader.
Yeah,
they have that, and they want to run for an office. I mean, to dissuade them because they need to go smaller. Just flies in the face of everything. AOC got to where she was because she didn't listen to that and because she had all that money. and influence, whatever. But the issue is that she didn't listen to them when they said go smaller, and that's what we need to do. You've got to fight back. But again, if somebody's desire is to change their city, run for city council. Like everybody needs to do what they're best suited to do and what they're passionate.
But I would say, if your desire is to change your state, run for school board, because that's where the Republicans are coming after your kids.
Yeah, it is.
And I'm going to transition to Palestine here now. But part of what happens when our system doesn't properly teach history is not only do we not understand that civil rights gains in America came from people not peacefully protesting, but suffering violence for their rights, whether we're talking about workers, whether we're talking about black people, whether we're talking about women, whether we're talking about gay people. The one thing every oppressed group trying to get more rights in the American system had to deal with was the violence of the state unleashed against them. And we don't teach that properly. We teach that the idea, and it even sneaks into the political music of the day. If you've ever heard the song by Dion, Abraham, Martin, and John, they talk about Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. freeing people, as opposed to the process of people rising up and freeing themselves. Martin Luther King Jr. was the leader of a movement. The movement was a lot of people. He was the figurehead and spokesman. And particularly when it comes to politicians, JFK was fighting tooth and nail against many of the things that he later approved with a smile and got credit for, simply because that's how the system works. When Martin Luther King Jr. was saying, we're going to march on Washington, LBJ was saying, now's not the best time. But the president's never going to think it's the right time for a protest because he's the president. Nobody in authority wants to be reminded that people can stand up for democratic process against the people who hold authority. Which takes us to this whole system where people are condemning Hamas on the internet while their constituents talk about liberating Palestine. And you had at least one California congressman repeating the lies about the faulty Islamic Jihad rocket that blew up a hospital in Palestine, which is now totally debunked. The IDF is back to, the terrorists had a secret base under the hospital. But we had people who were talking about that propaganda like it was the truth during that all-important window where Israel was killing people and the IDF was bombing mercilessly.
I've never seen the disconnect between the propaganda regarding the atrocities being committed between the public's response to it. Apparently, I mean, again, I don't trust everything I see, but some of the polls I've seen look like public opinion is that definitely that Israel should not do a ground invasion, should not escalate things at the very least, right?
If you look
but that's not the rhetoric that we're getting from the leaders for some reason. I mean, look at the Iraq war. At least at that time, I don't know, social media has really changed things. It really has connected us in a way where people now see the humans in Palestine as humans rather than just a news article.
If you look at a map of the world instead of a map of the United States, public opinion is not on the side of the IDF. If you look at a map of the world and not the United States, more people reject the idea that condemning Hamas is somehow a proper response to what's happening in Gaza right now. Now, internet service has apparently been restored from what I've been able to see in the media, and they were talking about people looting UN aid warehouses in a situation where there's nobody effectively distributing that aid because they've all been killed. And now we're calling people going and getting it themselves and distributing it locally looting.
You know, one of my big things is the American genocide. Ethnic cleansing is happened throughout history. There are multiple examples of it. The most well-known, of course, is the Holocaust. And what we're seeing, I don't see how you can label it as anything other than as such. They're targeting civilian populations. They're doing damage on millions of people here. And even if they don't kill them, their lives will never be recovered. They're destroying entire neighborhoods. It's something to witness it in real time and to watch all of the people twist themselves around to justify the actions being taken against what amounts to a civilian population. I mean, okay, listen. I
want to be clear here. Not just a civilian population, because here's where you have to understand the doublespeak of the Israeli state and the IDF. So, what we heard in response to the initial attacks by Palestinian resistance was that Hamas was killing civilians. Now, let's put that into context. Israel is a military state where everybody has the choice of serving in the military or going to prison unless they have a religious exception. The biggest Taylor Swift fan account on Twitter is a nice young lady based in Israel who disappeared for an extended period of time because she went to prison for refusing to serve in the IDF. So this is what you have to understand. Unless you're willing to go to prison, you are a soldier if you're an Israeli citizen. There's not an easy line between Israeli civilians and Israeli soldiers because all Israeli citizens have to serve in the military, and almost all of them are reservists, if not physically disabled. So when the Israeli state talks about attacks on civilians, you have to remember the context. Who are the people they're calling civilians? What is their life like? What is the difference between an Israeli civilian and an Israeli soldier? Oh, an Israeli civilian is an Israeli soldier who isn't wearing their uniform. As opposed to, in Gaza, half the population is 18 or younger. A good percentage, I don't have the numbers the same way I have the numbers for how young the city is. At least half the adult population is women and old people. So the actual number of active Hamas fighters is tiny, because first you have to look at the fact there's a tiny base of people to recruit from. And so you have a genuine civilian population of children and old people that is being warred upon by a military state, every member of whom is a soldier. Think about that. Think about what that means. A comparison, since you mentioned it, would be the United States, where an entire population of indigenous people was warred upon by a settler population where every white man was a member of the militia. This is one of the reasons that you won't see the American states in any way support the Palestinians or question the Israeli state, because the American state is guilty of all the same things, as you know better than almost anyone.
Well, that's what I say. You can see the parallels in the displacement of the indigenous population, putting us into small areas that are supposedly autonomous and sovereign. I mean, it's just, I mean,
so let's talk
the
about
bombing,
that, because there is a word for this that was used in South Africa to describe exactly what the United States and Israel do. It's apartheid. This is when you allegedly free the indigenous population, but you don't give them any institutional support of any kind. You leave them to their own devices, dependent on a state system that was waging war on them to put them in the position that they're in now. And then you call that independence, and you say you've left, and you point to them as scapegoats every time they complain. That was the playbook in South Africa. If you listen to the way they talk about you listen to the way the IDF talks about Palestinians as animals and barbarians, this is what the white South Africans were saying about black people in the 60s and 70s and 80s.
I know good people that for some reason can't understand that speaking out against killing indiscriminately these innocent people that have just been terrorized and brutalized for their entire lives basically isn't the same as saying I'm a terrorist. And it's crazy that it's a terrible tactic, and it's something that people do on a regular basis. And
you have to remember,
they don't mean it. Like, they're just deflecting from what is reasonable criticism. And it's honestly, it's something that really depresses me when I see people that I like doing this and not being able to take a step back and look at the humanity of everybody involved, and the fact that there are power politics at play here as well on a global scale. No. And just look at the people and to understand the human loss that we're suffering here, and to not equate that to some nation state or to some, it's really depressing, again, like I say, to witness this. And I don't know how to best combat it or to convince people that it's,
well, all you
like
and I
that,
can
other than
do
just
is tell the
continuing
truth.
to speak up.
All you and I can do is tell the truth. We have no power. We have no military training. We have no organized revolution behind us. So, I mean, all we can do is tell the truth about what we see and how we feel about it. But if enough people tell the truth and don't support it, refuse to support it, divest from it in every way possible, that makes a difference.
Right. That's the ultimate goal for everything. I mean, I think that people underestimate the power of collective response. And I think that us being fractured as much as we are keeps us from doing that kind of collective action that's needed. There's different factions across the board. And rather than, and it's not like a criticism of an individual. These are systems at play. I mean, we can't change it. We just have to do our best to overcome it. And that's, I hate when people make it sound like it's a criticism on you or me as organizers or anybody out there. It's not.
Well, let me say, I am someone who works very hard to try to give organizers a platform. I am not an organizer myself. I am not a good organizer. I am not a good leader. I am not someone who always has I'm not always someone who does a good job of organizing my own show. I'm good at talking to people. I'm good at communication. I'm good at saying things.
That's a part of organizing, though. I think you're short selling yourself. Connecting people like this is organizing in a way, whether or not that's your main goal or main focus. It's an integral part of what everybody else is trying to do. You have to have platforms like yours to help us connect with other people who are like-minded. It has to happen.
No, and that's true. And I really do try to network people together as much as possible. And one of the things that I've seen as a result of some of what now, looking back on it, can only be seen as, just sort of the natural disintegration of consensus when there's no organized movement. It makes sense that people would fall apart and become reactionary and end up fighting each other for shares of power in what they see as a revolutionary establishment, because they're used to thinking in terms of establishments. And it undermines the whole process of revolution.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's something that's going to be hard to counter and overcome. I mean, at this point, right now, politically speaking, we're really in trouble.
This is a good point. Divided. Connor is raising historically too. What I found interesting is that the U.S. in 1896, the presidential campaigns made a big deal out of Ottoman Turk attacks on Assyrians and Armenian massacres, partly due to the fact that these groups had high percentages of Christians being massacred. And now you flash forward to 2023, and you can see that similar situations aren't getting the same response. Now, I want to talk about this because this ties into history, both U.S. history and Palestinian history. That was a big thing that the Bush administration talked about, justifying invasions of Iraq, talking about how Assyrian Christians were treated by Saddam Hussein's regime. And there was a lot of political support building among Iraqi Arab Christians of Iraqi origin in specific states during the famous era of the War on Terror, where these Christian Arabs were being deliberately courted by the Republican Party as support for the war against Iraq, to show that they weren't racist and that they weren't and that the what seemed to be this Islamophobia and hatred of brown people was pro-Christian. It was helping people who were oppressed in. But you look at what's happened, and you compare that to how the Bush administration at the same time treated the Palestinians, and you have to wonder, how much do they really care about brown Christians? Because the Palestinians are a high percentage of Christians. Prior to the 1970s, the Palestinians were majority Christian, and Christians are still a significant minority among the Palestinian diaspora and the population in the West Bank.
I mean, doesn't that just prove that they speak to the audience? The only reason that they're going to bring up one and not the other is because of who they're trying to. Part of the success of branding all Palestinian resistance to Israel as Hamas, because Hamas is an explicitly Islamic organization, erases the Christianity of Palestinians and enrages Islamophobia to the point where now we're identifying an entire population as Hamas and erasing every other distinction within that population that's tremendously racist and damaging, and it undercuts any attempt to show that people are people, which again, it comes back to the indigenous genocide. When the reason so many innocent people died is not because there was disagreement about whether they were innocent, but because there was disagreement about whether they were people. And I think that has to be understood. The reason that innocent people die in Gaza is not because there is a disagreement
among the people of the world, whether people dying in Gaza are innocent. There is a disagreement among people in the West and the rest of the world about whether the people dying in Gaza are people. And the position of the Israeli state and the American state that supports it, despite rhetoric to the contrary from American politicians who are realizing that they are enraging everybody younger than 50, is, oh my gosh, this is disgusting and sick. What's happening? We can't support this.
That's one of the key things whenever a genocide is happening is the dehumanization. You have to have that because otherwise people's supposed moral code is outed as false, because to them, you don't kill people. They're protecting humanity because they only view their side as having the humanity. And we're seeing it expressed explicitly at times, saying these are animals, these are bugs,
and the idea,
and it's crazy.
The idea that the people who are dropping the bombs on Gaza are more trustworthy in their computations of casualties than the people upon whom the bombs are being dropped.
Well said.
I mean, it's all these arguments are only possible because in the base of everything, there is a dispute as to whether Palestinians are people, the same way that there is a dispute among white people in America about whether indigenous people and black people are people. And as long as you're willing to deny people's humanity, you can justify anything that you do to them because they're not people. They don't matter.
And I think that people need to realize, too, that in this particular conflict, a lot of different ideologies and bigotries are coming together. I mean, you've got people who hate, brown people from the Middle East. You've got people who hate Jewish people. You've got people. It's all over. And different people from from whatever spectrum they're coming from, they're using this to incite their particular brand of hate against whomever. And I think that this is particularly dangerous because, Israel, let's face it, is the epicenter of a lot of religions, especially the Christians here in the Western world. They view this as the ultimate. I mean, whenever your mind isn't thinking rationally and you're believing in your religious text or you're looking for some prophecy to be fulfilled, all rationality goes out. So we've got to be very conscious of the people who are not going to be good faith actors in all of this because they have a preconceived idea of what's happening based upon their,
You've got, plus there's this whole white supremacist geopolitical idea that goes back to Samuel Huntington, at least, about this fundamental clash of civilizations.
Well, it hits a lot of different things.
By civilizations, they mean race. When they say civilizations, they mean that the reason these are different civilizations and not one civilization is because the people are different races, which then brings the question of, well, then are these other people back into play?
It's a dangerous and scary time. All of this is on the heels of everything we've been seeing, to put it in a United States perspective, from what we're seeing at home in terms of the rise of this outright fascism, nationalism, suppression of LGBTQ people. I mean, outright targeting trans people and their identities and their livelihoods. We are looking at this at a global scale now.
Let's remember that the same deeply queer bashing asshat who made up the grooming bullshit about queer people is also the racist asshat who started the fake CRT panic. And so when somebody attacks one group, they are going to attack another. And they are going to do it in such a way as to try to divide the people they see as the majority against these minority groups. And the only way that it happens is if people betray their perceived racial interest in favor of their actual class interests. And I mean white people, because white people have to stand up to the Nazis if they want to not end up treated the same way as everyone else because they don't have enough money to be people to the people in charge. They don't own enough property. And the only way you're going to survive is by sticking up for the people that they're going after now.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem with everybody. I mean, even people that look at the Middle East and say, "Well, I don't care; it's not happening to me." They're unable to process the ways in which it could impact them in the future.
It
and so,
is
if you
happening
can't appeal
to
to
you.
the humanity, at least appeal to their common sense
Everybody,
that this is coming.
every working person in our society who is not wealthy enough not to have to care about the question is both pre-disabled and pre-homeless. And the pre-disabled and the pre-homeless need to pay very close attention to what our government does to the disabled and the homeless. When you see cities put all their money into cops and destroy homeless encampments, the same cops who are destroying the homeless encampments are the ones killing people. It's all the same process. If you do not see yourself as part of any other marginalized group, it is still important to see yourself as pre-disabled and pre-homeless.
That's a really great way to frame it for all of the people. I mean, everybody has this thing. You got to tell them, like, what's in it for me. Everybody wants to know that. I mean, but you can get it because these issues are universal. I mean, you don't care about humanity. Okay, fine. You care about yourself, and what you're seeing happen to these other humans will inevitably come your way because, as you say, you lack the power to to go against it once it turns on you.
I'm never going to be indigenous, and you're never going to be black, but there is a very strong possibility that we will be either disabled or homeless before we die, because that's just the world we live in now.
Absolutely. Exactly right.
And if you don't understand your position in society as a working American is pre-disabled and pre-homeless, even if it doesn't fall into any other marginalized group, you will be able to make better decisions.
You're trying to teach people to have empathy, and that's I mean, that's exactly what is needed. Is
and not just empathy.
Put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Not just empathy, empathy for the right people.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, empathy is weaponized too. There are lots of people who are going to tell you to feel empathy for the families of the off-duty soldiers who were killed in the Palestinian uprising on October 7th. Now, I'm not saying that you should not feel empathy for people who have lost their family members, but you should understand that you should also feel empathy for the survivors of the entire families being bombed out of existence in Gaza. And I don't say this lightly. The entire family of the Al Jazeera Arabic bureau chief in Gaza was killed. He was reporting the news, so he wasn't home when they blew up his house. But his family was wiped out. In 1947, the house of a Palestinian orange farmer named Abu Laban was blown up by the Haganah, and 12 people were killed, more than half of them women and children. And they were not a militarized society where every adult was an armed combatant. They were orange farmers. His Abu Laban's wife and 6 of his grandchildren were killed, and they were all children. All of his grandchildren were children. So when we talk about this goes back more than 75 years. And again, it's blowing up whole families. It started that way. It's continuing that way. What do you call it when you kill whole families? This is absolutely true. And I think this is really where I want to sort of end it here, to understand that anything that can be done to someone else can be done to you. And if you can't identify with someone in Gaza right now, and you can't identify with Black people in Chicago right now, or you can't identify with homeless people right now, then just remember that you're pre-disabled and pre-homeless. And that's how you should think of your interaction with the American state. Do you have anything you would like to say or promote before I wrap up, Seth?
No, that's heavy, man.
Well, I apologize for being so heavy, but I think it's important that we think some deep thoughts right now and apply those thoughts to how we're seeing everything that's happening, because we're getting there. And if you're able to see yourself as pre-disabled and pre-homeless, then that might make organizing easier and might make talking to other people about what we need to do feel more urgent, I hope. That's part of the reason I'm doing this. I appreciate everyone who's been supporting it, and we'll tweet at you.